Punk world's colonies. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
Welcome to 1 of 200. We're here with some live stream election coverage. I'm here with my co-host and co-founder, Philip. How you doing?
Kia ora. I'm doing very well, thank you, Kyle. How are you?
I am preparing myself for a Liberal majority government in Canada to fight back against Trumpism in the West and take pole position as the Western hegemon.
That's right. We are here for the Cory Booker podcast 2025. We've pivoted. We're now a pro-liberal centrist podcast. It'll be interesting. I'm excited to do something a bit different today. We do a lot of kind of more big picture kind of commentating, but I think it's nice to have an exact kind of more specific issue to zoom in on and talk through as it actually happens and we see results come out in real time.
Yeah, and also I just want to give a shout out to the person we have behind the cameras doing production today. Thank you, Dylan. Has put together an incredible suite of graphics and I don't even know what else to call these things, and making sure this runs, which I can't do. So wouldn't be coming to you with a live stream without Dylan helping us out as well.
Stick around. You'll see some cool stuff.
You'll see some really cool shit. I guess the other thing to keep in mind is that this is the debut of a lot of this stuff. We will be bringing it to you on Saturday, the 3rd of May as well, for the Australian election live stream, and wherever else we hope to do a live stream. Maybe there'll be another election in September after the government in New Zealand collapses. Who can tell? We've got some people in the chat already.
Right.
Kia ora to Sophie and Kaimatara and Joshua Girl. Welcome all. Yell in chat if you have any questions, I guess. And yeah, we, I think, have been talking a lot recently, if you follow us on the podcast, if you follow us on Twitter, about the shifting geopolitical landscape, I guess, is the broadest brush I can use here, particularly with the accelerating dissolution of the Western hegemon, the United States. That has had a direct impact on what's happening in Canada. Up until a few months ago, it looked like the Liberals were going to go the way of every other centre-left party across the West, being thrown out post-COVID and post kind of global cost of living crises. And Trump came to the Liberals' rescue by making some really overt comments about seizing Canada, essentially, which just worked completely against everything that Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives and the Conservative Party, had been trying to angle against Justin Trudeau's Liberals. I think alongside, their leadership refresh, where they put a banker in charge of the Liberal Party, has put the Liberals in a much better position than they were. But I know you have some feelings about this too, Philip.
Yeah, I mean, that's the received wisdom at the moment for anyone who's been, I guess, under a rock for the last couple of months and doesn't pay attention to Canadian politics, which you can be forgiven for not doing, is that there's been a huge tidal shift in the expectations of the Canadian election, right? Justin Trudeau was going to run for was it fourth term, I think, but was not polling very well. And then over the last year, there's been a kind of decrepitude onset of his support, including from people who were quite key to his coalition, including MPs in his own party, etc., etc. Google it if you're interested. This is now ancient history at the pace that things happen these days. But late last year, it was clear that he wouldn't be able to continue. And then Mark Carney became his replacement on quite kind of strong footing internally, which is interesting because he's not an MP, right? This is something we don't have in finance deal maker versus a Democratic operative has essentially been his kind of positioning, right? Whereas in Canada, in this election, there's been Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, who's been an MP for 20 years, professional politician. He's part of the machine, but he's trying to present himself as the anti-establishment. He's trying to kind of rebrand as what I guess Trump 2016 kind of was. Maybe not so much this time, but the more kind of Rust Belt style of Trumpism. MAGA Canada he's been called kind of the Canada's Trump, right? But then interestingly, the Liberals went with this kind of consummate technocrat, but also outsider, which is like an interesting position to come from. And he's sort of in the right place at the right time, right? This Mark Carney guy with a background in banking, both, Bank of England and then Reserve Bank in Canada before that, which was, you could argue unfairly, but has been praised internationally for weathering the GFC really well. So with more and more talk of a recession, it's a really powerful kind of set of cards for him to have been dealt at the right time. So there's a keep calm and Carney on meme that some of the libs are peddling in Canada is, I think, quite a kind of powerful suite for him. But I think that's interesting, right? Is that they're coming at it from the opposite side, but it's almost the reversal because he is the outsider and Poilievre is the insider because he's been a politician for 20 years, but he has to play this, anti-elite politics kayfabe that we've talked about before, right?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the key ways in which the Conservative strategy collapsed, right? Is that Poilievre was trying to play into some of these attacks on Trudeau, like taking Canada back kind of stuff, similar to what we saw here in New Zealand with the National Party going after Ardern and then Hipkins. But it's really hard to keep that rhetoric convincing to voters when your closest neighbor and ally really suddenly turns around and says, you're going to become the 55th state and we're putting 100% tariffs on you.
Yeah, I mean, Poilievre was too slow to adjust, right? Once Carney took over and once Trump went full 51st state anti-sovereignty on them, there was kind of a short window there, and Mark Carney was very quick to say Canada will never be part of the US and Canada's strong, elbows up, all these great little phrases that he has, which, heavily workshop phrases, but you fight with the armor you've got. But yeah, Poilievre was arguably too slow to do that stuff and stayed on the crime stuff and the cost of living stuff, which had been working for him until then. It was pretty much the Luxon 2023 campaign,
almost like they're all coordinating and talking about these things together.
Almost like these groups talk, right? But yeah, that he was just too slow to come out and say, I also don't want us to be part of the US, and that's that existential. And Canada, differently from, if you think of, pretty much any European country, has never really had its sovereignty threatened in a serious way like that since it's existed. So I think it's been more of a national question than maybe it would have been as, for example, like a heavily integrated EU country. Like if France had this election, I don't think it would have turned as fast as it did. But also something else to look at is the way the polling moved as those threats came in. Was the vast majority of the support was coming from left of the Liberal Party, right? So the NDP collapsed. The Greens lost support. Bloc Québécois lost support. A lot of these kind of left of the Liberal groups just collapsed and fed all their support into Mark Carney's Liberals as a show of support that to reinforce that, because it's a first past the post system, right? These people are living in the dark ages. They don't realize you can have alternate, more democratic ways of running a country than just saying whoever gets the most votes wins. So if you feel like you're going to quote unquote waste your vote, and something existential comes up, you can see why it would make a huge difference. And that definitely hasn't helped the Conservatives.
No, and I guess alongside that, we had Paris Marx on the podcast a few weeks back to do a pre-analysis of the upcoming election. And I couldn't help but make direct comparisons to the way that Hipkins approached our election in 2023, as well as the way that the Democrats approached the 2024 election in the US, right? I don't even know like what words to use to describe that kind of adherence to a accelerating rightward center. This need to show fiscal responsibility by just cutting everything, just deciding to do nothing, like this complete political stasis among the ostensible center-left parties, right? Which was basically the way that both Hipkins Labour and Harris with the Democrats in the US lost their elections. Alongside the Conservatives in Canada failing to respond effectively to the moment, Mark Carney decided to actually go and do some things instead of dangling them to the electorate as things they'd get if they voted for his party in a few months, right? So rolled out better dental to people, did some childcare subsidy stuff, and just put it straight on the table and said, no, we're implementing this now because the cost of living right now is bad. And immediately showed that he was someone that could make things happen. Alongside, having direct conversations with Trump, where Trump almost immediately turned around and said, oh, okay, these guys aren't backing down, so Mark Carney's a good guy, really, and it just helped to feed that nationalism, I guess, as really only the only word you can use for the way that Carney has been able to consolidate this.
Well, I think some of the takes you see from the US get quite confused about liberals and their nationalism. Like liberalism, when it's taken in a US context, is often seen as tied to a kind of maybe soft power at best, kind of democratic establishment, international norms style way of thinking. Whereas in Canada, there's this deep history of the Liberals being the kind of expected party of government, in the same way as in New Zealand. The National Party's been in power for most of our history, so we kind of get it. It doesn't; these two things don't have to go together in the same way, right? The kind of everyman of Canadian politics can come back to that kind of civic nationalism in a way that doesn't assume the kind of aggressive, expansionist, patriotic, insert your kind of right-wing catchphrase here, philosophy of the Republican Party in the US. In fact, that's often not the case. There are a lot of countries where that's the case. But a lot of, I think, pundits from the US get confused by this kind of multiple understandings of liberalism that different countries have, depending on 50 to 100 years of developing history and political attachments to various coalitions, etc. Right? So yeah, it's just they are the party of government, and if you wanted to imagine a coalition to defend the interests of kind of establishment, small c conservative Canada, those leaders tend to be the ones in the past who've done so, including like Pierre Trudeau. Justin's father was record-breakingly popular, record-breakingly long support, and Justin Trudeau held on for a really long time against interests that on paper he shouldn't have been able to. And there does seem to be this almost like psychological tie to the Liberal Party that these figures just maintain support for longer than Conservatives do, right?
Yeah, I think another thing that we can keep in mind as well is that there's this consolidation of the left parties towards the Liberals on this basis. And in Canada, because they're first past the post, the fracturing of the right wing there into there's conservatism and there's like the what do you call, more federal, more regional, progressive conservatives, which is like Doug Ford, which are, both conservative parties, but are often at odds with each other, and are less likely to feed into each other in the way that the Liberals are able to take votes back from NDP and the Greens. I think it's a really important, if we're looking at it from a New Zealand perspective, and a really important consideration in the way that electoral strategy is being implemented in different electoral systems in the West. If Canada had MMP, they may be able to do a tail wags the dog kind of situation like we have in New Zealand, where we also have a semi-fractured right wing, and they can use the ACT Party and New Zealand First to implement all the policies that they want. But if they were to take a bunch of votes in the same way, or split the votes more effectively, there's less of that return home, because there are political alliances that just don't exist there, because of the way in which those national versus regional politics play out. I think one of the things Paris was saying on the podcast was that Doug Ford won his seat back in the earlier elections, and the Conservatives hadn't approached him until they became desperate. And Pierre went to Doug Ford to say, "Oh, come and help us with strategy," and Doug Ford's like, "Nah, I'm too busy." And I really don't think you'd have that happen in New Zealand, where there's more of an understanding among the right wing. And by understanding, I really mean they're all the same beast. The people running these strategies are specifically utilizing each of these groups in specific ways to move the Overton window and implement horrific policies in a way that isn't happening in Canada. Interestingly, just in the chat, Kai Matara noted that Pierre Poilievre was close to David Seymour's Canadian think tank, the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, which of course is where David Seymour started his career as a junk tank associate, and which he continues as an MP in New Zealand. But these organizations really do have similar goals. They are trying on the same kind of stuff, the same messaging. And we'll probably see some of that over the course of the live stream today. The way in which there are very eerie echoes of New Zealand rhetoric popping up in some of these places.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before the kind of sovereignty crisis, for want of a better term, in Canada, all of their issues were pretty much cut and paste from what we'd recognize here in New Zealand. Like, it's, in terms of economy, it's a much bigger, more powerful kind of country, right? It's like 9th largest world economy, but it has a very low population density, very high household debt, largely the debt's in housing. There's a housing crisis. There's a level of immigration that provokes a lot of debate, especially in the cities. Cost of living, crime, all these things that subsequent New Zealand elections have been run on for the last kind of 10 years, right? So the structural factors are all pretty much in play. There's obviously ongoing kind of Indigenous debates around the level of colonialism that different parties are willing to kind of push back on or push forward, as the case may be. So, yeah, I think we can kind of see ourselves to some degree in Canada, and especially with much, much bigger, more aggressive, louder and more irritating relative next door, right? There's this really common comparison of New Zealand and Australia being like Canada and the US. And, in a lot of ways that's not true, but in the most basic of ways, sometimes it is. So I think it's pretty relatable in New Zealand, where we hear people in Canada saying, whoa, we don't want to be part of the US. This isn't us. In the same way as I think we'd see if a far-right Australian politician took over and started genuinely talking about invading and conquering New Zealand and making it a state next to Tasmania, right?
Give it 4 days, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
When Dutton takes out the
Watch the
Australian
space.
elections, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting the way in which all these things are basically the same. But this is what happens with capital and crisis, right? There are one or two ways they can go, and there are enough of the wrong people with access to power and resources that it gets funneled in that direction. But like the upside to that is that if you're doing analysis, if you're watching this stuff, and if you are willing to apply it, then you can predict this stuff and you can respond to it effectively. And I guess one of the things I'll be thinking about for Canada and then Australia is, what does that mean for Aotearoa, right? What lessons can this give to Chris Hipkins' Labour Party, such as it is? But also, what levers and angles of pressure does it give the Greens and Te Pāti Māori to pull Labour to the left? Because we do have MMP, and we're less likely to see that kind of consolidation. One of my major worries is that if the Liberals do win tonight, which is looking relatively likely, and it is based predominantly on that collapse of the NDP and the Greens, is we'll see Hipkins pollsters, because let's not pretend that Hipkins has any original ideas of his own. The people in his kitchen cabinet and in his little cohort of fuck-ups who tell him what the public thinks, will say, "Oh, that's the way we should win. We can only win by beating up the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. There's no other way to do it. Instead of learning real lessons." And yeah, hopefully we can get ahead of a few of those today. I don't want to start operating the lathe, this far out from New Zealand's 2026 election, but sometimes you can't help it.
Can we get an overview of where we're up to?
Oh, thank you. Oh, look at this. Look how, wow, incredible.
Newfoundland, Labrador. Okay.
This is the popular vote.
Yeah.
As we go area by area.
No, that's great.
Now, I don't think this always relates directly to, Liberals kind of winning seats here. And we've seen consistently in a number of first past the post countries that sometimes you can win the popular vote and still lose.
Oh yeah.
One way or another. I would be unsurprised to see, I've already put my prediction out as a Liberal win here, but I'd be unsurprised to see it as a Liberal minority, which is probably good if they have to rely on the NDP again, such as the NDP remains, to be able to get things across the line. What are your thoughts, as we move through the next few hours, as to who's going to come out on top here? Let's do some horse race.
Okay, let's play horse race games. I think big picture, Mark Carney called the election at the right time and has been totally vindicated for that choice, because Trump's been unable to help himself from continually polling and campaigning as hard as he can for the Liberal Party by attacking Canada as a country.
Also, just to cut in there, it looks as if it's like perfect timing, because as the campaign has gone on, the Liberals and the Conservatives have come closer together after the Liberals peaked about a couple of weeks ago. So, and as kind of some Trump's rhetoric has cooled off, right?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. But I think that Conservatives will do better than predicted in results, probably not in numbers. just because Canada hasn't really had recently this kind of like populist right campaign. And Pierre Poilievre, before the Trump thing, was running a very smart kind of right-wing workerism, fake, fake anti-elitism, as we already mentioned, strategy. And it worked pretty well, right? There are some kind of private sector unions who endorse the Conservative Party. More unions than ever before endorse the Conservatives, which is pretty significant. Not a million years after, was it Harper? That was like the ultimate kind of right wing crushing austerity government de jure that we would kind of talk about 20 years ago. And it's pretty crazy to think that you can turn it around that quickly, especially with a machine politician like Pierre Poilievre. Like he's been in power for 20 years, right?
Especially when it's clear he's lying.
It's clearly lying.
And that it's like constructed kayfabe, right?
Yeah.
There was one moment when he went down to a bunch of business leaders who had just in the last couple of days beforehand had been going and getting donations from them. And he walked in like, oh, you people don't like help the working class at all, and like gave him a dressing down. And you're like, what is going on here?
It's the Boris Johnson thing, right?
Yeah. And as long as you have a media that's willing to like buy it and say, oh, echoes of 2023 in New Zealand as well. Wow, the National Party really ate Labour's lunch here. Like, wait, they're actually lying about everything.
That's not a problem though, apparently, right? But I do think the way that he kind of targeted constituencies is going to pay off for them. So I definitely wouldn't call a Conservative victory, but I just think it'll be closer than some people are giving them credit for, because he'd built groundwork that didn't look the same as previous Conservative governments might have. And the kind of campaign that the Liberals have run would have been hyper effective against a standard Conservative campaign, but I think some of that efficacy will be dulled just because of the kind of groundwork that he'd put in. And Pierre Poilievre has worked his ass off talking to a bunch of these groups that other Conservatives would have completely ignored.
Yeah. And this is this is that cost of living stuff coming into play again, right? In the same way it has everywhere else. Cost of living and the I was going to say the reigning champs having kind of watched over this occurring, whether that's the Liberals or the Democrats or whomever. There is still that feeling in the electorate that they need to change to make things better, whether or not the people are outright lying. So that is lurking in the background, and I don't think that should ever be underrated.
And the Liberals have been in power for a long time, right? You can put a new face on them, but it is a bigger ask for Mark Carney to be the man for a change than it is for Pierre Poilievre, despite the fact that Mark Carney was literally not in Parliament until just now. But he's now the establishment because he's sort of fallen into those shoes. Whereas Pierre Poilievre does have kind of for a change as their kind of watchword. They can push that in a way that doesn't have to be genuine because it can resonate.
Yeah, we've got a little question in the chat from Sophie. Is our right fractured, or is it the same donors playing a 3-card Monty? Do the prog cons have the same deal, or do they represent different factions of capital? In New Zealand, I don't think it's really fractured. I think it's a joke, right? Like it's a put up. You'll see like personal politics sometimes come into that, as they jostle for pole position. But like even Winston Peters saying he was going to punch David Seymour didn't stop them from working together in government and like completely taking the state apart, right? They are working with the same people. In Canada, I think they do represent different factions of capital. It's a much bigger country. There are just larger groups that can fund and have those factional rivalries. And that, I think, in a way, someone like Trump doesn't. There is a more liberal conservatism that has sufficient resource and electoral population that does kind of want some of the more liberal trimmings. So it makes it potentially harder to drive some of the stuff we've seen in the UK and the US, which is widely called a culture war, to really break up that electoral playing field. Like, a lot of the really nasty stuff has not entered into the Canadian election in the same way as it even has been in New Zealand. And I think that's a really interesting and important thing to keep in mind and to take into account when you're looking to transplant analyses across the different Western electorates. I think the one which has kind of come up a little bit, and it's because it's fucking horrific, is the genocide in Gaza, where Carney came out like accidentally strong on it by calling it a genocide and immediately got monstered a little bit for it, and then resiled from it. But it hasn't really been the kind of hot button issue as it even was in the US. I think maybe beginning of this week, maybe end of last week, the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh challenged Carney directly on this, but it didn't really land. There's not the same kind of understanding as there was in the US that this is being the genocide is being directly funded and armed by Canada, although they do have a number of companies that are involved in that kind of shit.
And to be fair, I think that would have looked very different if it was before the tariffs issue, which has really just eclipsed a lot of other stuff. So international affairs is notoriously hard to make catch in an election campaign, especially from the left, because it doesn't have necessarily kind of kitchen table hooks, right? You can't say, oh, how you've been stressed about this thing for 2 years. And, it hasn't been on the 6 o'clock news because establishment media haven't been covering it. So no, it hasn't, been on the mind of most Canadians, even though it's, the greatest kind of humanitarian catastrophe of our time. And that the fact that Mark Carney kind of said that without putting too much kind of emphasis on it, I think shows his naivety as a politician, in the same way as when, it's a funny comparison, but I think it's true, when Donald Trump ran in 2016, he would just say things that are clearly true. If you're not a politician, you're allowed to say, right? Because he was my favorite one to think about is when he was talking about being pro-life, quote unquote pro-life, right? Anti-abortion. And he was asked about what that meant. You could see him kind of thinking in real time as he was asked. He was like, well, if it's pro-life, if it's murder to kill a baby, that means that the doctor has performed a murder, which means the mother has ordered a hit, essentially, right? And the interviewer was like, what? Politicians aren't meant to say this. But it's true. If you genuinely thought that is what you would think. But every other right-wing politician's practiced enough to know that those aren't the words you use, right?
Yeah.
You couch this stuff. And you have to know the people you're talking to and your constituencies. And in the same way, I think people both are drawn to that and find it kind of like a car crash and watch that kind of unpracticed ability.
Yeah, we also haven't seen the explosion of anti-trans rhetoric becoming any kind of major election issue there, which is the number one fascist wedge being implemented by both the US and the UK at the moment, and increasingly here in New Zealand. I reckon it'll probably happen after the election, but most parties know this shit is incredibly unpopular, and that's why a lot of it only really takes off when someone already has power and they can just brute force it. Mm-hmm. If we look at the UK, and Starmer, he was like, no, I'm not touching this, essentially, before the election, right? And now they're basically the worst in the world on this, with the US rushing to catch up. One thing that has been mentioned to me is that Mark Carney is apparently very good mates with both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, who are two of the worst people in the UK Labour Party. They're outright evil. And despite that, or I should say, despite that, hasn't followed the current UK Labour playbook, right? but it would be interesting, like, to be clear, Liberal win better than Conservative win, but let's not have any illusions about what centre-left institutional parties are at this point. They are very much here to usher in much worse political situations in a range of ways, and specifically a lot of the time make it a little bit easier, or a lot easier, for fascism to wipe out kind of electorally protective institutions, while building up authoritarian structures and enforcement, using we need to think of a better term than culture war, but using that kind of anti-solidarity attacks on vulnerable minorities. So that's part of why I say a minority is best here, because it does mean that there's still an ability to pull the centre further leftwards, should people be able to do that, should people have the nous.
And look, to come back to kind of go full circle back to the question around different factions of capital and different factions of the right, I think Mark Carney, as leader of the Liberals, gives us a really kind of perfect encapsulation of that, because he is Mr. Green Finance, right? Like, the thing he was famous for.
What we could have had in New Zealand with James Shaw being Prime Minister.
I mean, yeah, he is kind of James Shaw dressed up in more conservative clothes and with more conservative leanings, because that's what he was. One of the things that he became famous for in the mid-2010s was his, or maybe a little earlier than that, was his direction at the Bank of England talking about finance having to take climate change into account, and none of this was left-wing posturing, right? He was only talking to owners of capital and investors. That was his audience. And then as soon as he enters the political arena, despite that kind of being his background, he doesn't lead with that stuff. He leads with the kind of macro prudential competence. One of the first things he did was get rid of some climate tax costs for consumers to help with the cost of living. He's not coming in with a Green New Deal, right? So, I mean, there is that kind of that understanding of speaking differently for different audiences, and like he is the kind of the woke capital guy, So there are different factions of the right, and he is deeply of one of them.
If people start chanting Black Rock,
yeah,
this is what Hatkins tried to get it across the line as like his big boost for the economy was this $2 billion BlackRock deal, right? Let's not pretend that Labour isn't also a faction of capital.
Big L Labour, obviously, but yeah. But these tensions with the US at a historically high point have managed to make that kind of disappear for the moment. But I think you're right to be cautious that after the election he won't go full Starmer, and who knows what will come after that. And probably a lot of that will be determined on who he has to form alliances with and what kind of promises he has to make. Obviously, the NDP last time weren't very happy with how that coalition went. So I think it will be interesting to see if they do have to form another coalition with the NDP or someone like them, like not to draw any conclusions, to see what kind of commitments they're forced to make, considering how badly that went for the smaller party in the end last time. I watched the space again.
I'm getting some updates.
Let's do it.
We're seeing polls close in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta. Thank you, Dylan. And Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Nunavut as well. So we may start seeing some results coming soon. One interesting thing that we're seeing so far is we've had a couple of ridings, I think they're called in Canada, electorates for the New Zealand crowd. Ridings is right. Fantastic. Thank you again, Dylan. That have flipped to Conservative. And alongside that, it's looking like a few of the Liberal ridings that have have maintained a Liberal MP or are looking to have just increased their vote by quite a bit, which will be interesting to see how the popular vote plays out against the number of ridings won and MPs here.
This is what I was wondering about, right? And this is what I was kind of intuiting before, is that the popular vote may not be representative, and because Pierre Poilievre has campaigned in a different way from previous Conservative campaigns. This is out of date now, but from early on in the campaign, it looked like he was quite strategically hitting areas that they hadn't managed to hit before. So I was wondering if some of these kind of macro poll numbers wouldn't play out the way that people expected when it came to actual electorates.
Yeah, well, we're going to start finding out soon. One thing I didn't mention at the start, we'll be taking semi-regular breaks throughout this. We'll usually just dash away for 3 or 4 minutes and put some music up for you all to listen to. But it gives you a chance to get away, get a drink of water, get some snacks or whatever as well. And you don't have to feel like you've missed anything. How far off are we from taking our first break there, Dylan? All right, I've heard that we could go on one now, and that we might do as we wait for some of these results to come in. Thank you for everyone who's joining us so far. Another thing you can do while we dash away from the cameras is chuck some questions in the chat, and we will address those when we come back to the live stream. Really happy to talk, obviously, about what little we know of Canadian politics, but I guess more broadly, our own areas of experience and analysis, and how some of this stuff applies to New Zealand politics and geopol as well. So feel free to chuck things up there, and we will try and get to that. How does this work, Dylan? Does it just suddenly just transition? Okay, let's just do it. Let's get in. We're going on our first break. We'll catch you again soon. We're back. All right. So we've got a few good chats from Kaimatara linking the ACT Party back to Canada, as we've talked about previously. We've started to see some results come in on some of those bigger ridings, but I'm not sure how quickly these move. But I'm watching a map and I am seeing multiple ridings just change color now. So that's a lot of fun. Yeah, I guess
the NDP vote collapsing by as much as 75%.
Oh, that's
just saw, which is dramatic.
Yeah, we said when we were on the podcast with Paris that there's this chance that the NDP didn't get above the amount of seats to get funding.
That's right.
I mean, and the Greens could be gone altogether. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Again, though, they may have holdout ridings that get those MPs in, and a lot of what you're seeing in terms of vote collapse might be consolidation within ridings where there was going to be an overwhelming liberal majority anyway. So wait and see, I guess. We'll start also to see whether or not. There's one up on the screen that. So one of the things you're going to see down the bottom of the screen there is there are a couple of different ways in which it is showing seats. There is a seats 1, and then there's leading seats, but leading seats could mean 1% is counted, or all the way up to 95% if it's close. So that's just how it works in Canada, apparently. We had some conversations about this before we kicked off the live stream and the decisions of Canadian broadcasters. We certainly wouldn't do it that way. So big electoral give us resources. I'm sure that would work.
We do get
some better coverage of the way you do things.
I'm sure we've all been at we've seen electoral broadcasts in New Zealand where people get a bit in front of ahead of their skis, and they go, "Oh, look at this! There's a huge lead in this region. It's 20% called or something," and you're like, "Wow!" I mean,
is it?
Give it a minute. Yeah,
we love horse race politics, and we will continue to do some of that throughout the day here. But we'll also, as some of these results start to come in, as I was saying just before we left for a break, we may begin to see some of the way in which that increase in liberal voting tendency actually has an impact or not. We're definitely seeing. I just saw a writing on the map. It was red and then it was suddenly blue. So we're going to be getting a lot of that over the course of this. Votes coming in bits and pieces, but I imagine, like with any electoral process, we'll see some small updates and then we'll suddenly see some big updates.
And the provincial differences in Canada are quite interesting, I think. As a non-Canadian, it's quite fascinating how disparate these different kind of provinces are in a way that even with, in New Zealand in the last election, and actually the election before as well, there was talk about the kind of rural-urban divide, splitting the country, etc., etc. That's nothing, right? And New Zealand,
we don't have Quebec, right?
Neighbors, yeah. We are essentially just 1 or 2 generations apart from all the other colonizing Pākehā who just happened to own land instead of stocks or whatever it is, right? In Canada, there are genuine kind of massive differences in ownership and industrialization in different areas. There's more trade between Canada and the US than there is between provinces in terms of value of goods shifted. So it shows how much more that connection of north to south is factored in than the west to east, east to west. And both Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney have been talking about increasing that as an alternate way of achieving kind of infrastructure and trade than just relying on the US being a massive, massive proportion of their GDP and their entire kind of economy. And the less friendly the US is, the more kind of compulsory that will be. It's either the US or China, or at a stretch kind of Europe, if that's your trading model. But for such a disparate country, you really need to bring some of those barriers down between the provinces, which isn't something we can really conceive of in New Zealand, right? It's not like if I want to buy something from Christchurch, it's just going to get on a train, come up, go over a ferry, and then come to Auckland. There's not going to be 3 different time zones for it to go through and 4 different provinces.
I press extra doubt on your train call because it's probably on a truck.
double X to doubt my ferry call at this rate, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so in theory we have this very unitary kind of structured economy, whereas Canada is just all over the show, and that comes out in all kinds of cultural ways as well as economic ways.
Yeah, so this is one of the things. We're looking at Ontario up on the screen, and this is where Doug Ford is the premier, who's part of the Progressive Conservatives, and this is part of the reason why he didn't really want to work with Poilievre, is because Ontario was incredibly targeted by the US tariffs. It was really bad news, and he more or less he had too much other stuff to do. You would have also seen during that period when Trump was first making these sounds, there were people in Canada saying, okay, we're going to turn off all the power to the US states that we supply power to. And that's because some of their energy infrastructure just goes south. There are places where pipelines go to the US and don't go to the rest of Canada. It's the US is a huge economy. Of course, it's going to draw the economies towards it. And so the attack by the US on Canada in that way created existential problems at a more regional level.
Yeah, it really is hard to kind of emphasize how different it is for people who are outside of Canada and haven't kind of read about the Canadian economy. It's entirely been developed with this in mind, right? And for decades, there's been this conversation around more kind of regional internal integration, but it's not an easy thing. It was there was some prediction that to refocus the amount of regional trade that at the moment goes from Canada to US and vice versa on internally within Canada, it would have the GDP predicted for the next decade or so. It would be a massive restructure of their economy, which is why it's such an existential threat. And that's that's purely on an economic level. That's not factoring in the entire cultural difference, which they're a fellow kind of Commonwealth country. They didn't have a Tea Party or an anti-UK kind of backlash in the same way as the US does. So they do have quite foundationally different structural beliefs. Legally, economically, they're more similar to New Zealand or a UK than the US is. And it's just not the same. It's not fair to say that they are essentially a 51st state, right, of the US. It's completely different.
It's absurd.
Even though they do have the same population as California. So it's not like it's a big country populationally or economically, but it is fundamentally different.
A couple of questions in the chat. Some concern that Election Day, the Elections Canada official site has been unreachable for a bit. I think that has been solved now. I haven't seen anything saying exactly what went wrong there. But it was stopping people from finding the polling stations, which is never great, right? But, it's not the US. They don't have quite the same level of electoral malfeasance. So I don't see it being a serious problem. Think of that question. Koslaw.
It's up again now. It was down an hour ago when I looked, but it's up again now.
Yeah. Kaimatara asks, do you think it'll be close, a landslide, or something in between? I think it's probably going to be closer than people were making out a week or so ago. Same as what Philip has said. But as we saw, in the UK, for example, sometimes you can have things that are really close and delivers a ridiculous result, right, in terms of popular vote versus where MPs end up. Obviously, it's not going to be like the UK. That was a kind of generational collapse of the Tories there. But never discount electoral mathematics as being able to provide some interesting results. There's another note here. David Seymour worked to undermine Native Canadians by pushing against the Truth and Justice Reconciliation in Canada. He also worked for Brexit Central, who reckons when he's done it with New Zealand, he'll try and run another country in the future. No, he wants New Zealand. I'm not sure he'll be done with New Zealand. Maybe we'll be done with him. Fingers crossed. But this is an interesting point around Indigenous peoples, right? Because another thing that Canada hasn't had in this election, as far as I'm aware anyway, is a Brexit, The Voice Australia, or here in New Zealand, what we had with the co-governance anti-Maori rhetoric that they're trying to turn into a citizens-initiated referendum of the treaty principles, right? There wasn't that kind of structural attack on... I don't even know what to call it. I mean, for the US, for Australia and New Zealand, it was very much an attack on Indigenous peoples. In the UK, it was something else again. But similar strategy, right, used to push these. It's beyond wedge politics, right? It's like divisional politics, really trying to split electorates down the middle and then divide them up from there. It hasn't really happened in Canada, but that's not to say they're not planning to do some really bad things, and that's across the board. So both the Liberals and the Conservatives have some pretty bad anti-Indigenous policies on their books that will come into play, with kind of clear juxtaposition with New Zealand. I think there's one for the Liberal Party, which is basically like a fast-track bill, which would allow them to do development or extraction without duplicating environmental reviews. But what it would potentially mean in practice is that they could ignore Indigenous groups that are against pipelines and the like. So, yeah, we really are looking at an age in the West, and that probably means globally, of intensified extraction as capital tries to get whatever it can. And I think they have, like, the powers that be within capital have correctly identified that Indigenous peoples are one of the major barriers to them doing that, because the Western left doesn't exist in any way that matters. Whereas Indigenous communities do exist, and they have community and they have organization that can be utilized in a way that can stop the state. So yeah, both the Liberals and the Conservatives, obviously to a greater degree, will be looking to run a little roughshod over that issue. What are you seeing on the screen there, Philip?
Yeah, absolutely. Just more results coming in. Can we shoot through some more, Dylan?
All right.
Awesome. Quebec. Look at that.
Cosler said in the chat, Alberta is wanting to pull themselves out of the Canada pension plan, so this vote will be important to watch where things go there too. They are pulling for a Brexit. So yeah, there's going to be a range of that kind of stuff, right? We're alongside this kind of acceleration of capital. As part of that, they need to destroy the institutions and systems and structures that regulate capital. And that's been what a lot of what's happening in New Zealand is about. But we're going to see that from everyone. We're seeing it in the UK under Labour, right? Like under the ostensible Workers' Party. There's no reason to believe that the Liberals won't do this in Canada as well.
Especially if they don't have a clear voice to their left. So I think that's what's going to be worrying about the collapse of the NDP, which, has had its faults, and we've talked about in the past quite critically, I think fairly. But a 75% collapse or more is quite a scary kind of prospect if there's no electoral vehicle for an organised left outside the kind of remnants of kind of public sector unions who softly support the Liberals, or the kind of disorganised Green kind of fragments. That could be pretty nasty for the Canadian left, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and for the world, as they say. It's like a lot of the stuff, it is very global trends at play here. The big question is going to be, I guess, for Canada, whoever wins, is how much they end up aligning with the United States, right? And the US seems to have made that pretty difficult. And this is why we say, we were talking about in the last few years, places like Brazil, where Lula won. Lula's not like a communist, right? He's not far left. He is center left, but it is better to have him in than an accelerating far right Brazil under Bolsonaro. And we're in a similar situation as long as electoral politics exists with the Liberals in Canada. Or it would have been, no, I mean, the Democrats in the US are absolutely fucked. I'm not going to draw that line.
Lula is just what you get when you have an actual social democrat. It's just that so many places around the world seem to have forgotten what that is. So he gets called all kinds of things, when really that's what the centre left should be, is that you take power and then you use it to redistribute some of that power and you make poor people better off. That's
what
it should be that's what the Labour Party should be. It's just that all the Anglophone Labour parties have become parties of capital and pretty much just supplicant to whatever their faction of capital happens to want to push against the right.
Yeah. So that's going to be the big question for me post-election day, is whether Carney immediately calls up Keir Starmer and says, how can I make this worse? And there'll also be a really important thing to keep an eye on regarding Chris Hipkins, right? And a Labour campaign for 2026, regardless of what they end up offering. And there's no guarantee they're going to offer anything good at this point. Labour in New Zealand is trying to do like the UK Labour first few weeks in power while they're still in opposition, which is just absurd. It's so absurd. So there's definitely lessons to be learnt from Carney here in terms of running an election campaign. But we will be keeping a close eye on what happens following that. All right, we have more results coming in. We are seeing more votes counted as well. I'm told that the People's Party leader lost his seat.
Wow, look at that.
So that's something.
Love to see it. Love to see it.
It's.
No, that's great.
It's definitely something that you expect to see under consolidation, right? With some of these minor parties. But it is good to see the worst parties getting dashed with some of that. So People's Party is like quite far right.
Yeah.
maybe you'd even say very far right. They are like they're, would say Polyev has kind of been doing this kind of MAGA Canada stuff. These folks really are. They're like what day one Trump was like in his most recent iteration. So it's like anti-immigration, anti-diversity. In fact, I would say they are basically like a combination of the ACT and the New Zealand First Party here, right? That this is the group that's trying to inject that stuff into national politics in Canada. So that stuff really has been seen as a distraction here, given their geopolitical positioning with the US. Another lesson that perhaps left-wing parties in New Zealand can learn.
Also, I mean, we've seen this before in New Zealand, right? If you think from a New Zealand perspective, when we've seen these kind of, what should we say, I guess the reconsolidation around two major poles, the elections where the minor parties play a smaller role and the power from all of the kind of minor supporting factions flow upwards towards two figureheads. We've seen those in New Zealand as well. And this is kind of what you get as a reconsolidation on both sides. So I wonder to what degree, this will only be clear in hindsight, I imagine, but to what degree one was caused by the other, because Polyev was, I think, running a really effective campaign, as I said before, and was sucking in a lot of that kind of proto-MAGA energy. So maybe the People's Party was already going to do badly, and then as a reaction to that, a lot of centre-left and left-wing voters felt that they had to support Mark Carney in the centre as a kind of bulwark. I mean, these are the kind of perverse results you get in a first-past-the-post system, right? It does just feel quite out of date, living in a blessed country with MMP.
Well, I mean,
in New Zealand.
Is it blessed? This is the thing. You can see some of these like more extreme ideas just absolutely stomped out. And I know like a lot of people to the right of 1 of 200 like to say things like, oh, but like, New Zealand First and ACT, they're just like the right-wing version of the left wing. But it really can't be stated enough just how much more extreme groups like the People's Party of Canada or New Zealand First or ACT are than a party like Te Pāti Māori or the Greens, right? Like we do not have an equivalent electoral bloc here in terms of extreme policy wants, and so what you have is right-wing parties under MMP who are able to just inject the stuff immediately straight into the national discourse, and they don't get stomped out. And then the left is like, we all have to run towards the center.
I don't see extremism as a useful measurement, because like compared to what, right? I don't know how you measure how extreme actors compared to how extreme Te Pāti Māori is on like specific issues.
I'm thinking entirely about outcomes towards humanity, like at this point.
Does extreme mean bad though? I mean, of course.
Right. No, right. I see. I'd use radical if we're talking about change and difference, whereas I generally use extremist like in terms of a negative, but I see what you mean.
Okay.
Extremely, I'll just say extremely bad. How about that?
Okay. No, fair enough.
We're starting to get puns in the chat. Well done holding out this long. Kaimatara says, Safi wins, will they be hosting a carnival? Well done.
Hey, very good.
Yeah, and then thanks a lot, Overton Window. Yeah, like this is the thing, right? Like this is what happens when Capital has unprecedented and historic access to enormous international information networks and resource, like more than ever before in human history, right? And they choose to use it. We have heard from Dylan that all polls are now closed.
Great.
That's exciting. Now we just get to watch the countdown. Yeah, I don't know. I do use extremist in the way that disinfo people use it now, which is like not a credit to me, which is to mean, people wanting bad, violent things. But also because, as I said, there is no extreme left. like that does not exist in Western politics. It's not used thinking about. It arguably doesn't really exist in global politics. Like maybe if we had like a radical communist party here, we could have some positive extreme stuff. But yeah, for the most part, MMP has not been delivering for us on that front. Where perhaps it is delivering in Canada to get rid of some of those worst ideas. But again, we'll see what happens once someone takes power, right? Because a major factor in the way that these ideas have been being implemented and reproduced has been the capture of powerful people and political leadership in the face of overwhelming support against these ideas. They've been brute forced into the public discourse, and the electorate shifted on the basis of often governmental and media capture. So, you know, what's happening in the UK, for example, under like a Labour majority, it's not popular in the UK. You know, like a lot of the stuff is really unpopular. You know, a lot of the stuff that's happening in New Zealand, a lot of it's incredibly unpopular. And that goes for like the culture stuff as well as a lot of the economic stuff. We are probably at one of the worst points ever for electoral representation in terms of not just people don't know what they're voting for, but people have views on stuff. Politicians lie about stuff and then do the opposite. Palestine is obviously another major example of this.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, there was that study from Chomsky. When was it? I can't remember. Maybe a couple of decades ago now, where he was looking at the kind of the policy views of people with no power in politics at all, and then the policy views of people with the most power, and just the amount of discrepancy there was between those things increasing as time went on.
Yeah.
And that's obviously that's a measurable that I think is quite kind of clear.
We've got our first projection that has just come up on the screen now.
Let's go.
So CBC is projecting that Liberals will form the next government, but are unable at the moment to say whether it will be a minority or majority. Okay. We've got a smiling and laughing Mark Carney there. Wow. Canada's strong. Man, that's so like America first, right? That like it's incredibly nationalist, and this is always the risk of the shit.
Yeah, that is.
You know,
but that's what I mean. Like, nationalism doesn't mean the same thing in a context where you're being brutally economically assaulted by an enormous neighbor. Yeah. Like, nationalism doesn't mean one thing. You know, this is like an ongoing refrain.
But it's something that the left has to be incredibly aware of, because as you have a flailing hegemon, like nationalism increases because you want to like not get crushed, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. But how do you keep that away from becoming one, ethno-nationalism, which is maintain like a consistently and rapidly growing part of the discourse at the moment from a number of well-resourced and platformed commentators. How do you stop it becoming xenophobic? How do you stop it being aimed at countries like China, as opposed to like the actual threat, which is the US. The US is a major threat to every other country on the planet Earth, folks. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone that in this chat, but maybe if some people have popped in who are not familiar with our viewpoints, that is an important point to make. But yeah, I mean, again, good. Like, I'm not going to vote for Liberals. Like, I'm not going to vote for Labour. But this is one step further away from the absolute capitulation of the West towards whatever the fuck Trump is up to. Yeah. Fingers crossed. Like, never underestimate the ability of politics to spin things on its head.
Sure.
Looks
like Bloc Québécois has done very badly.
Interesting.
Mm,
even moving in on Bloc Québécois in Quebec.
yeah,
Um,
it's not good.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
will be interesting, because if it is a minority, liberal minority win,
Yeah.
then
Where do they look, right?
doesn't give them any options.
Yeah. They, you know what? As would say in New Zealand, in the gallery circles, it's time for a grand coalition. We need to pull together against the threat of the US.
Yeah. For first 2 years for the Liberals, second 2 years for the Conservatives. Seems fair.
Seems fair. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's essentially what they're doing with New Zealand First and the ACT Party, right?
It's Canada strong.
Yeah, Canada strong, Canada together.
Yeah.
I found out recently that a Canadian saying is "all ice is home ice," which, with what's happening in the United States and the immigration police, could certainly become something with a double meaning. But this is why it's good to see something like the People's Party of Canada get a stomping, right?
Yeah.
Because they are the major party pushing that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say that Canada aren't going to head in that direction anyway, as border disputes become an issue. But they're also in like a, historically for Canada, moment of opportunity, right? Like, I think Kanye has even been talking about in the last few weeks, saying like the US has played this role in international order. Maybe it's time for Canada to step up, which is like a pretty wild thing to be talking about on the election trail. And a lot of it's rhetoric, but where do people look, right? As the RBIO collapses under the weight of fascist venture capitalism.
Yeah, just seeing more predictions that the Liberals are going to be ahead, and I mean, in whatever form that is, right?
It's kind of nice doing this one instead of the fucking US one we did last year, eh? Wish we could have brought a few more people along for the ride for this midday live stream. But it is always nice to see things not tip into like immediate fascism.
Yeah.
If any of you were along for that live stream, it got pretty dark.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, so dude, like let's talk about projections now that this is starting to become clear that the Liberals are probably going to take this one out in one form or another.
Yeah.
Do you think that Canada can begin to play this kind of role with someone who really is trying to present himself as, and probably has the PR skills to be viewed as a kind of elder statesman sort, for Canada to take a stronger role, to take a more of a lead role in world hegemony from North America, right?
Good question. I think there's kind of two parts to that. I think the first kind of bigger picture thing is that the structure of what that global hegemony, including kind of trade flows and relationships to things like the UN and the WTO, those organs that have been the foundations of a rules-based international order, are going to be so different and are going to have such massive kind of changes in the next 5 years that the question almost kind of goes full circle and becomes kind of what will we need in that amount of time, but I think on a more zoomed in scale, yes, I think I almost wish it wasn't the case, but I think Mark Carney is unfortunately kind of the right person in the right place at the right time, like I said before, and has accidentally kind of fallen into a role where he can perform the skills that he's honed over the last few decades doing banking nonsense. And unfortunately, banking nonsense is the exact kind of stuff that you need to be showcasing right now if you're the leader of a country trying to bat away entirely kind of economically illiterate tariff talk, which, it pains me to say, as a leftist and someone who thinks that free trade has hurt the working classes and the colonized poor all over the world. But Canada was never going to be a bastion of multipolarity, right? So at best, maybe we can hope that Canada kind of joins a middle power block of countries who care more about kind of self-sovereignty and kind of respect that on a more kind of European, kind of South African, maybe New Zealand kind of level, as opposed to a soft kind of hanger on that when the shit hit the fan would swing in behind the United States. But who knows? Who knows, right? It's really hard to tell. And I do always think it's dangerous when someone who has a history in banking joins the capital P politics community and we pretend that we know what they think, because we don't.
No. I think a really clear indicator is if Canada starts to take some leads in kind of the UN space on stuff like Palestine.
Yeah. That would be a huge shift.
And I personally, I think they need to, if they want to take any lead in any kind of middle block, because the big geopolitical split right now is between the global South and Western hegemony, right? And Western hegemony, not just the United States. The United States obviously is the hegemon and is leading that direction, but there are a whole bunch of other moving parts of that are not necessarily aligned with the United States wholeheartedly. So we're talking the EU, the UK, Australia, right? Some of which are aligned with genocide, and some of which are a bit more concerned about it, which is almost euphemistic. A lot of weapons companies in these countries are like just pumping weapons out and selling them to Israel. How quickly do you think that Canada will flip the script on its head and take Alaska?
It'd be a beautiful map. The map would be so beautiful. Imagine, folks. Yeah. Canada can't even take their own country, Carl. So
it's interesting, eh? I mean, the other big on a geopolitical scale question here is, what's the relationship between Canada and Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Mexico is the other country that has been relatively successful with pushing back on the United States under Sheinbaum, who, by all accounts, is quite left-wing. And that that's following like a kind of semi-social democrat kind of politics under AMLO before her, and you have to think that Carney is calling up Sheinbaum number one, right?
No, I wouldn't think.
No, you wouldn't think it, but that's what I would do. That's what I would do. Yeah. He's going to call up Keir Starmer. And like, I got it, mate. Well, that was an Australian accent. Horrific.
There's no difference between Australians and Canadians on that count.
Well, I think Australians are probably more racist.
I'm sure they have spoken about the tariff thing, and it is decimating both of their countries economically. But they both have tracks to turn that around in different ways. Painful tracks, to be clear. Like, it'll be awful regardless of what political choices they make in the next.
Oh yeah, this stuff is really generationally bad.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible.
For everybody, for the entire world.
And a lot of people will be massively hurt by it.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you integrate your country with another country, and then the bigger, more powerful country pulls away. Or either way, right? If half of your economy decides not to work with the other half of your economy, regardless of what you do, it's not going to be pretty, right?
No. Well, this is the thing as well, right? Like, we've talked about it in regards to Argentina. We've talked about it in regards to El Salvador. Some stuff happening in the UK under like Truss and under the Tories, and happening here in New Zealand at the moment. This absolute slash and burn, like shock and awe destruction of public services to inject rampant venture capital often into the economies as some kind of transformation, preying on desperate electorates, and utterly destroying countries, like absolutely utterly destroying the economies of those countries. I think in the UK, something like 300,000 were said to have died, been socially murdered by austerity, right?
Yeah.
Similar is happening here right now in New Zealand. And when the US does that, oh, sorry, I missed that, Dylan. Fantastic. Going to have a break in a few minutes, everybody. But when the US does the same stuff, and to a greater degree, like they're essentially doing the Javier Milei stuff, right? It just impacts the entire world. Where the entire world is getting taken through like economic shock and awe, like absolute like destruction, shock doctrine of the international order and the international economy to destabilize everybody and make them more amenable to private capital. And that's really evil.
And in Canada, there have been economists talking about a risk of recession as early as the second half of this year. That wasn't going to happen, until these tariffs hit. There's been a massive turn. So you can see the reason why there's been this massive change in the political futures of these parties.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take another break while we wait for a few more results to come in. I'll just say last little update we've seen. Liberals have been riding high at more than 50% of the vote for the last little while. So yeah, looking pretty clear at this moment. But minority or majority? That's the question that we'll be seeking to answer over the rest of the live stream. Let's take it to break. Okay, I am halfway through eating a natural confectionery company snake, and it's my fault.
This podcast is sponsored by Natural Confectionery Company.
God, I wish.
Particular.
That would fucking slap.
I wish too.
So we've had some things come in just while I've been on break. Carney looks likely to win his seat. Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty big
Stomping.
majority at the moment, eh?
Stomping, I think, is the technical term for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We've also got the leader of Bloc Québécois, very likely to win as well.
Yeah. Comfortable.
And here's another fantastic graphic from Dylan, which shows the current seats. We've got Bloc Québécois over the other side as part of the opposition at the moment. But of course, that may change if they make a deal with the Liberals, depending on whether it's a minority or majority government.
Yeah, so I mean, blue doesn't mean blue for those of you, those of us first timers with Canadian politics.
I was when I was choosing my outfit, I initially had a light blue t-shirt. I was like, wait a second.
You chose your outfit?
Well,
Wow.
I mean, put some clothes on.
Oh my god.
And I was like, well, no, this is Bloc Québécois, and I'm not really a supporter. I'm going for the Liberals are the light in the darkness with my Mothman shirt.
Terrible. Mothman shirt? Can we get a better look?
Yeah, some little Mothmans.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wow. What a twist.
Such a twist. Mark Carney, the Mothman of Canadian politics. I think this one will catch on.
Many don't believe in him, but he does kill people. Is that why? Is that what you're going for there? Why? How is he the Mothman in the darkness?
I don't know. We've got another pun. Canada. That's
Canada. Canada.
I wonder if any of these will actually become like things that the Liberals use unironically.
I mean, at least you have the options with a name like Mark Carney, right? I think Pierre Poilievre would have been it would have been difficult. A tough few years for satirists with a name like that, I think. Carney does lend itself to some dumb fun.
Yeah, we had in our Discord chat previously people saying like it's going to be a Mark Carnival, which I think is quite good.
Mark Carnival is good, yeah.
But Mark, also a good name to riff on.
Yeah.
So plenty of opportunities, and that's why he should win more than any other reason.
Yeah, I should have thought through my name a little more before becoming a politician. I think Philip. It's mostly for evil uncles, I think.
Or people married into royalty, or royalty itself.
What's the difference? Same. These pictures are the same to me.
Yeah. Okay, so Liberals, they look like they are well on track to being the government again. Do you think anyone will learn anything from this?
I think if it goes as well as possible for the Liberals,
So like outright majority.
Outright majority. I think if the Liberals get an outright majority, which is, within the bounds of possibility, other kind of parties around the world who consider themselves more centre-left will try to take lessons from it and inevitably probably badly misjudge the moment and the reasons that happened. Like, if you just look at the raw polling, the election this reminds me the most of is the Jacinda Mania election in 2017.
The comeback election.
Well, the
Ish.
election where, similar reasons, right? Unpopular leader of the lefter kind of major party was replaced by someone who kind of met the moment, was again kind of in the right place at the right time, made massive gains really quickly, courted the media really effectively, crucially demolished support for parties to, in that case, her left. And that's kind of
really nasty ways.
And that's kind of what Mark Carney's done, right? In terms of brute numbers. So if that's the lesson that people like Chris Hipkins take from this election, then that would be unfortunate, because that means punching left. And
it might mean that he
really happy MP.
It might mean that he backs out, though. It might mean that he leaves
and is replaced by which charismatic and moment meeting MP will foot the bill?
Well, it has to be someone outside who's not an MP currently, and has an economics background or a banking background, so it could only be Craig Rennie.
Oh God! Actually, oof. No, Kyle's on the lathe. Back away, Kyle. Back away. This is the problem. The lathe of history is just too tempting.
He could have catchers like from locked out to locked in.
Oh God, that's so niche, Kyle. Even for you, that is a niche.
But I do hope that Hipkins steps away, right? Like, I hope he does take that lesson somehow, or his advisors do, or his caucus does. I think he probably has too much compromise on everybody for that to happen. But like, this really is an issue for some of these other centre-left parties, right? Like in Australia as well, Albanese's not well liked at this point.
But it took Justin Trudeau over a year of being pretty roundly pounded by his own party.
I guess that's the thing.
Openly, to the media after years of internal disputes. So I think it doesn't happen overnight. And in a 3-year electoral cycle, I'd be very surprised if anyone in the Labour Party kicks anything off in election year.
Because he's got so much compromise.
Well, I mean, you might think that. I couldn't possibly comment. It's but that it does remind me, like, just looking at the graph of the Liberals versus the Conservatives versus the graph of the Jacinda Mania, widely kind of supported Jacinda Mania moment that the media absolutely went wild for. It's the same effect, right? A minor decrease in support for the Conservatives and a massive surge in support taken from the left, because that's who you're appealing to. It's, if that works, it's in very different circumstances, right? Because FPP, you do need to punch left to win.
He didn't even punch left, though. This is the thing. Like, he took votes from the left as it consolidated. But he's also taking some votes from the right, from people who are like, oh, actually, the Conservatives were aligning kind of with Trump previously.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Punching left is different from taking votes from the left. I'm looking at like what lessons people might
absolutely
inaccurately garner, and this is part of the problem, I think, is that political parties and operatives in entirely different political circumstances and in structures with processes and institutions that function in entirely different ways, and electoral systems that are entirely incompatible, take lessons from one sector and just assume that you can cut and paste something. You can, if you're Alistair Campbell, you rant about like the Ming Vase thing, And then Chris Hipkins says, yeah, probably, right? Who knows? Like, yeah, let's do that. And win like a massive majority in a country with MMP. Like, insane transition.
What's really funny is that they never learn the lessons of the failures, right?
Yeah.
So Hipkins isn't looking at the US and going like, oh, wait, maybe not doing anything was bad.
Yeah.
Right? He's not saying, wait, Kamala Harris just fucking tanked and lost to a right-wing economic populist because she offered nothing. He's saying, maybe it could work for me.
Or Adam Self 1.5 years ago. These people never do think it works for them, but it might work for us.
I never thought it could work for me, and it didn't work for me, but maybe this time.
Yeah, the temptation is just too strong, eh? But that's the difference between a party that's inexorably tied to capital. We'll see.
We've got a couple of comments in the chat. One, Kai Matara says, your political slogan could be backflip, like backflip.
Backflip? Hey, that's very good.
Kylie says, please, McAnulty, please. With reference, for those who don't know, to everyone absolutely on board with Kieran McAnulty as a future leader of the Labour Party. Hipkins is so uninspiring and unimaginative. Ika Makamaki says, so glad things are looking good, star, for Canada, with the footnote, not terrible. Yeah, that's about where we're at. I think
that's fair, yeah. I think that's fair. And it is going to be interesting also to see how they constitute their actual kind of power brokers. Because one fascinating thing about having such a new leader immediately kind of throwing everything up in the air and, you know, using some power to actually push through some change, but then calling an election, is that we don't really know how the chips are going to fall after that, you know? When for the New Zealanders, which I think most of us are probably Kiwi here, but the power brokers shifting between even different elections in our major parties has created major changes, right? If you think kind of early John Key versus late John Key, or first term Jacinda versus second term Jacinda, like people who are at the kitchen cabinet, the number 2 and the 3, those people can make massive decisions. So it will be really interesting to see who gets promoted in the Liberals and which people are making those kind of actual consequential kind of changes and decisions in that cabinet structure, because Mark Carney hasn't been forced to tie himself to any factions in the same kind of way as Justin Trudeau was, because he had that political legacy, right? So if you come up through those political channels, you form alliances over those years. There are people who you get on better with, there are people who you make enemies with, but he almost hasn't been forced to do some of that stuff. So it could be a rough couple of years. Like, he's been thrown in at the deep end, but the good thing about that is that he's a good swimmer, you know? So he has the one skill set that you need, but once he kind of surfaces, for want of a better analogy, we don't know which raft he's going to build. It could be anything. So it is unpredictable, I think.
This comes back to that Starmer post-election thing, right? They basically just promised not to be the Tories. Well, with the implication that, the Tories had done devastating austerity, destroyed a whole bunch of stuff, were getting pulled into these stupid culture arguments, and then Starmer wins an overwhelming majority, pretends it was anything other than a refutation of the Tories' policy platform, and proceeds to take it further. To do worse austerity, just some absolutely brutal shit, alongside buying into some of the worst anti-trans rhetoric, continuing to be a strong supporter of Israel. And there's almost no one in the party membership that agrees with this shit, right? Let alone the rest of the country even.
It's the Bulger of the UK. It's the early 90s for the Labour supporters, right?
Wait, do you think in 20 years Keir Starmer will go on record as saying the whole thing failed?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah, actually,
that's how disingenuous he is.
I don't think he makes it that far. I think people
assassinated in 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know. We're gonna find out, I guess. Things are accelerating. He is extremely well hated.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah,
Let's,
that's my big worry.
let's do some data. It's data time.
Let's do some game theory.
It's time for some data. All right. Wow, check it out. Okay, big jump. Looking pretty, yeah, pretty solid for the Liberals, right? In terms of the pace that things are being counted. Considering that's confirmed seats, a lot of sites are showing predicted or, at a much lower level of confidence rating. I think that's pretty strong start for them, and definitely a bit of collapse for Bloc Québécois, but could be worse.
Yeah. That leading seats data, it's so wild. Right? Welcome to everyone who's joined mid live stream. Got a few more people in the chat. Carl saying Labour would need a positive vision and to communicate that clearly. Yes. Unfortunately, they don't have that ability. Kai Matara says Hipkins used to work as a trainer for the oil and gas industry for Todd Energy, which is also a member of the New Zealand Initiative. Yay, it's all tied up.
Yeah.
That's why it feels moderately conservative. I would say, even as a Labour MP, the Labour Party is pretty conservative to start with, so he doesn't even feel that extreme in there, does he? And then welcome Samuel Archer as well, commenting on me saying well hated.
Great.
Look, it's a whole spectrum, right? Well liked to, or well loved, well liked, well hated, well despised,
or badly hated, badly liked. We need a political compass for likeness. Yeah. Look, obviously you don't have to agree with us with our takes, but you won't hear these perspectives
anywhere else.
Or
these words sometimes
in the New Zealand commentary world. So welcome, and we appreciate you listening and joining in.
Lots of stuff going on. Oh yeah, my election site just went back down as well. That's real funny. Hopefully, that'll be why the data wasn't working for a second there earlier. What are we saying now? What are you reckoning? It actually is moving against our earlier predictions in some respects.
Yeah.
Conservatives are not really being able to put up the numbers just yet, unless we see some kind of wild turnaround.
I hope I was wrong with my initial thinking that Conservatives would overperform, and the Libs are doing pretty well, I have to say.
I think, and I was talking about this back in the New Zealand election as well. We're at a political moment where a major party can just absolutely destroy their opposition if they take power at this point. Because there'll just be so much infighting. There'll be so many different ops going on within these institutions that being on the out, being in opposition under these circumstances, and being put under any pressure by a majority party will just absolutely tear you down. We're potentially looking, if the Liberals should really win out on this one, the Conservatives are going to have an existential crisis.
Yeah, where do they go from here, right? They've done the classical Conservative thing. They've done some of the kind of dog whistling stuff, and then they transitioned that into, no pun intended, the first term Trump kind of faux working class stuff, which I thought they ran pretty well. I don't know how you go more fake populist workerist than they did with Pierre Poilievre. So if he doesn't continue on that track, I don't know what the next kind of cab off the rank would be for them, because they've kind of exhausted their options. If that doesn't do it,
yeah. I guess the major counterexample again is UK Labour, right?
Mm.
Where by all rights, the Tory party should not exist anymore.
Mm.
But it's been the hard turn to the right from Labour, the absolute like buy-in to austerity, making people immensely desperate, that has allowed for the flourishing of reform. So it's in fact the centre-left party that has hard introed fascist politics into the UK.
But
So you can never discount like a centre-left party doing that in any country.
But if that was, I mean, if there had been any sign of that happening so far, you'd expect the People's Party to have at least kind of made its
No,
basic
absolutely.
ground,
Like,
right? And we're not seeing that in Canada.
yeah, and that's
So,
what I was saying with the like lack of a
yeah, it's an encouraging
like a Brexit
counterexample.
kind of situation, right?
No, I agree. It is. I think it's an encouraging kind of pushback on what's been perceived to be that necessary kind of cultural platform. I mean, well, who knows? Who knows? We'll see. It's hard not to be skeptical as someone of the left who's seen this happen many times and then be disappointed with the performance of someone who campaigns against the right and then governs almost the exact same as the right would. We wake up tomorrow and Mark Carney's welcoming ICE agents into the country to hunt trans people. Like, we can't.
All ICE is home ICE.
Well, all ICE is home ICE. Yeah, we can't discount this stuff.
Or just going, hey, like just like Joe Biden said, we're going to build the arsenal of democracy and send it to Israel, right? Like, no, and like, genuinely.
I mean, Canada has not been good on war crime stuff in the past, to put it generously. So yeah, and Mark Carney's not someone with a deep-seated kind of connection to human rights. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if his foreign policy is, if anything, worse than Trudeau's was, in terms of allying with the probably not so much the US, but still the rules-based international order, i.e. the UK and maybe France, to fund genocides overseas and repress independence in poor countries, etc., etc.
I'd argue that the major existential threat to Canada right now is the US, though, right?
Yeah.
And that should align you directly against them in most of these sorts of things. Like the Israel outpost model of the US in the Middle East is very quickly returning to the US as an imperial boomerang. We're seeing like just outrageous stuff happening on the streets of the United States as this kind of increasingly militant, and I mean that in the sense of being armed, political extremism returns home.
Militarized.
And that's happening like predominantly through ICE currently, right? Who have targeted Canadian citizens already, like within the first like few weeks of some of this stuff kicking off. And I think that means that Canada is almost required to take certain policy actions to ensure the continuity of their institutions that precludes some of the more authoritarian stuff, because that in the mid to long term just ends up aligning them with whatever's happening in the United States, and then they do become the 51st state, right? Like,
it's functionally, if not politically.
Exactly.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think that's like broadly the right kind of track to assume that we're on. I worry that they don't
understand it necessarily, or they like it.
The reactionary impulse of the kind of Canadian intelligentsia is pretty nasty. So I wouldn't be surprised if things end up worse than we'd assume.
Yeah. Got a note from Kylie in the chat. Carney's kid is non-binary. So if there's one thing he's not going to do, it's transphobia. Oh. So there's that. That's interesting to know.
Good to know. I didn't know that. Thank you, Kylie, was it?
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
He for sure could still do genocide apologetics, though. He already is. So yeah, it's really interesting. But at the same time, like what you're more likely to see in that regard, as Canada kind of looks at this existential threat over its border. Who else is near it? Like, who else can it even have a connection to? You're likely to see an isolationist Canada in some respects, where it turns its spending inward quite a bit more to start building infrastructure that it has been lax on building across the entirety of Canada in some respects, rather than looking across the border to the south. Is going to need to look at shipping as a major investment, right? Because if things get much worse in the US, you just can't send stuff through that border, right? Like, what are you doing after that point? So
Yeah. Economically, this is the problem, right? And in terms of like flows of goods, here's a alternative proposition, Canada. Instead of becoming the 51st state of the US, become the 24th province of China. It's just across the water. You're already importing stuff by sea. And they are more pro free trade than the US is. You love that stuff, don't you? So get involved.
well, I mean, this is what happened, I think, with Mexico, right? As soon as the tariffs kicked down, everyone was like, okay, we're going to onshore in Mexico instead.
Yeah.
Like, Mexican economy was like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Canada's going to do the same. But as we were saying earlier, it is a significant amount of pain that will be felt by working people while that restructure occurs.
Yeah. Pretty much regardless of what they do, it's going to be a tough couple of years.
Yeah. And I think this is the other thing to keep in mind, right? Around who has influence over global politics and national politics at this point, because in the US, and increasingly as they become a hegemonic arm of US primacy, I guess, it's US venture tech capitalists. And destabilized economies are a really great place for people with hundreds of billions of dollars to drop in and say, hey, just let us make a fucking network state in this little corner of your country. We'll pay you up some big dollars. We'll give you free internet. And Mark Carney has been like in conversations with and friendly with Canadian and North American people in the tech industry of that sort. So it's something else you have to keep an eye on as being like one of the through lines on why global instability is happening, right? These hyper rich tech billionaires are a major driving force because they want to carve out their own little corners of the world.
Yeah, I don't see any major. Oh yeah, let's see some. Great. I was just looking for confirmed seats. Let's check them out.
Here we go. All right, so just slowly creeping up.
Strong.
Kaimatara says, add another C for Canada to BRICS. Like, unironically, that way.
BRICS. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
they should be looking to Central and South America. Like,
it's not a small,
without a doubt.
Small economy. It's not a small economy. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they do. But yeah, they've never been so politically disengaged with the US that that's really been seriously on the table before.
Yeah, I mean, the issue for them is their current political issues with India.
Of course, yeah.
Who were trying to maybe successfully sometimes assassinate quote unquote dissidents on Canadian soil.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing is just like the liberal campaign against Russia has been really strong in the West.
Yeah.
So
well, that kind of that kind of internationalist perspective drift, perspectival drift, I want to say. I'm going to call it, is why I wonder about whatever kind of caucus or kitchen cabinet Mark Carney assembles around him, because there'll be a lot of those people. He's not steeped in international relations or foreign policy. His bailiwick is very much the kind of macroeconomic side of things, which, again, right person in the right place at the right time. Like, it's lucky that's who he was, but what's he going to do about all of the other issues that a country inevitably is going to face up to?
Okay, we're seeing a couple of things. Carney now strongly projected to win his seat. And here's an interesting piece of information. He's the first prime minister to hold a seat in what is now Ottawa since the 1880s.
Oh, I did not know this.
Time to start a political dynasty, bro. And in a massive, like, kind of weather vane result, the Liberals have retaken Toronto St. Paul's riding, which they'd lost last year in a by-election. So a really clear indication of the swing back. Yeah. Dylan is letting us know that CTV News has declared a Liberal minority.
Interesting.
So yeah, that is interesting.
And it looks like Guardian is going that way too, pretty soon, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Both, it's sort of hard to call when both of the major parties overperform, right? They both kind of come back from quite weak years to being able to at least get back to where they were before.
Yeah.
Because of collapse of minor parties. It's interesting, I think. Because what does that mean for your support bases? I think that's something we've seen in New Zealand as well, is when minor party support collapses, what does that actually mean in terms of issues? It is quite hard to know, I think.
Yeah, again, it comes down to that contextual stuff, right? As well. I'll be glad for a minority here. And, just hope that Jagmeet Singh decides to step down as NDP leader and gets replaced by someone effective.
I don't know if that would be enough. If 160, that might not even hit 172 seats.
Oh. Well,
it really just puts Bloc Québécois in the driving seat.
Also fine.
Interesting. An interesting time for independence.
I mean, what it comes down to is, like, if you're in a situation like that, you need people who have a theory of power, right?
Yeah.
And this is something we've been talking about since 2017, when the Greens were in and around the government.
Yeah.
And we had the Scottish Greens crashing out.
That's right. And the Irish Greens.
And then you had the NDP, and from 2021 onwards, just like getting their lunch eaten, essentially, bringing in these pretty decent policies, some really good stuff. And then the major party going, hey, look at this cool thing we did. It was us. Yeah. It was us, because we're the party of government. We're the natural party of government. And we weren't forced to do it because of the coalition agreement. It's just because we're the good guys. And in fact, we're being held back by these other guys, or target them with dirty politics stuff, and try and drive them out that way, or make them the foreign minister and send them overseas, right?
That's always a smart strategy. You just need someone who doesn't really care about actually achieving stuff to do that.
It's pretty funny that Christopher Luxon is basically doing the foreign minister thing, eh?
Yeah. That is funny. That is funny.
But I don't know. Do you think that, just as a general, I guess, consideration, if we're in a period of greater instability globally, does that give more opportunities for left-wing minor parties in a government collaboration? Does it give them more power to actually do things, or does it kind of mean that they're less likely to?
I don't think it makes a difference because I think minor. Sorry for the unsatisfying answer, but I think
Disgusting.
Minor parties unfortunately tend to be caged in politically by the positions of their closer to the center contemporaries. So like if you're, the easy examples are like if you're the Greens right now and the Labour Party in New Zealand happens to push really hard against genocide and against the state of Israel, you don't have as much room to maneuver, right? So I don't think,
and that's why Labour should take that stance,
yes,
just to steal votes from the Greens.
Yeah, I mean, not just, but yes, they should do that. Yeah, exactly right. So I don't think that's the kind of flow necessarily. If when there's more stability, sometimes that gives a centre-left party room to manoeuvre enough that they actually edge out minor left-wing parties. For example, the Clark government, I think, is a good example of that, right? She very effectively destroyed support to her left because we were in a period of economic comfort for a lot of the kind of middle classes. And there was kind of a global rising tide of boats, and there was a commodities boom in countries, and we were sort of doing okay and floating along. And housing prices hadn't really hit the points that they did after that. So she was able to destroy the parties to her left by keeping left without having to fundamentally restructure anything, But vice versa, you could imagine a world in which the major kind of centre left or centrist party is forced to go along with whatever kind of mainstream established viewpoints there are, and then you're forced to, as a minor left wing party, take that oppositional position. But I think you have to be reactive, unfortunately, as a minor left party as opposed to a major left party.
Yeah. But like you're never in a good position, right? That's just how institutional kind of power works.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at just doing a quick comparison of results from last year and this year, and like NDP really has cratered,
It's really brutal.
Down from nearly 16% is currently sitting at 5%. Greens down from 6.5 to 0.9.
Incredible.
The Greens are kind of bad in Canada, though, folks. Quite bad. Bloc Québécois is actually doing pretty well. They're actually up a little.
Yeah. There were a few early headlines about them doing badly, but I'm not seeing that. What I am seeing is that Pierre Poilievre kind of looks like a evil fat version of Chris Pink. Is anyone else seeing that?
What?
Find some pictures of Pierre Poilievre. In some of the news shots, honestly, he looks like an evil, overweight Chris Pink.
No, I haven't seen that.
I'm not happy to. This brings me no pleasure to report.
You mean he's got a rounder face?
Yeah.
I think there's something wrong with your eyes.
Well, there is, but that's fine.
Something I noticed about both Carney and Poilievre is that all their facial features are like they've got a lot of face around them.
Maybe that's Canadians.
Yeah, maybe.
See.
But yeah, like what's really interesting is NDP had like a historic amount of the vote previously, and we're able to get some stuff like picked up by the Liberals, but now just cratered, like have not been able to build anything out of that. And we've pointed at this in particular alongside some of the other international examples as a lesson for the Greens here. Like you cannot operate fully alongside your government partner. Like they are your opposition as well. I think the current iteration of the Green Party understands that a bit better. Than under Shaw, because anyone who's followed us knows how we feel about James Shaw. But he was just mates with them, and he wanted to like do his thing, and like didn't really build the party at all. And I think that's shifting, and especially ever since 2023, like the run-in, that campaign was about building more on the ground capacity. because you need to be challenging the center left if the center left is going to the far right. Like you can't continue to just latch your fortunes to theirs. You have to be willing to vote to coalition government with either National or Labour. I thought I was going to get more of a rise out of you with that, Philip.
Well, it's obviously wrong, but
no, but you do need to be willing to sit like on the opposition benches.
that's what crossbenchers are for.
Yeah. Just
or
like,
opposition. You don't need to form a government. It's fine.
No.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, I don't know what the NDP will do. If it does come down to that, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm mostly just seeing a lot of liberals saying that Mark Carney is the Lord and Savior of the Liberal Party.
Oh yeah.
But I mean,
it's either that or say that Trump is, right?
But you don't have a majority, so what does that mean, right?
It means they were going to lose and they didn't lose, Philip.
Yeah, which is okay, fair enough. You know, you weren't going to have a job and now you do. That must feel one projected Green Party seat, maybe. Okay.
Yikes.
Yeah, brutal. Oh, there it is. Yeah, go ahead. Saanich Gulf Islands.
Elizabeth May is co-leader of the party. Not a good person. Applause at Liberal HQ when Kanani's projected when announced. Wow, it's really pathetic.
I mean, fair enough. What else do you do at Liberal HQ? Not applaud?
I don't know, blood sacrifice or something. Like, let's kick this off. Let's really get this going.
Oh, no.
It's something that I am hoping that people pay their correct attention to here in the New Zealand context. You know, we were saying at the beginning of the live stream, a Carney win is going to be grasped at by other Western centre-left leaders who have upcoming elections. Let's have another chat about whether we think Hipkins and whatever set of people plugs directly into his brain and controls him like a carnival puppet is able to synthesize this effectively.
A ratatouille, if you will.
Yeah, but worse and grosser and less animated, perhaps.
I mean, what lessons? It's always hard to know what lessons these people take, right? Like, is it the brute calculus of where you get votes from, like I was suggesting before, with the kind of punch left implications of where Carney's votes have come from, but looking at, you know, NDP and Green Party being the main victims of the growth that the Liberals needed to sustain their increase. And that's the kind of the repeat of what I remember as the Jacinda Mania thing. Or is it a policy thing? Ideally, hopefully that's the lesson that he takes, because Mark Carney, for all of his kind of technocratic impulses, at least had the, I guess, like political gumption to use the power that he had while he had it before announcing an election and actually make some changes, like you said at the start of the stream. So I think that's the bold strategy, to just say, like, I would be doing this now. It's a bit more difficult when you're in opposition, right? Because
almost like Hipkins wasn't in opposition going into election and could have done that and did the opposite.
Well, yeah, that would make sense if that's how he ran the first time, you know. But too late for that. Yeah,
I mean, this is the thing, though. I'm just not confident in their ability to like analyze correctly, right? Which is probably the most frustrating thing about this sort of stuff. He is already predisposed to be doing the worst idea, and unless Carney does this and then follows up with some of the same kind of stuff immediately, we're talking like first 100 days like Trump, but in the opposite direction. Then I'd say there's no way that it's getting picked up as a model by the New Zealand Labour Party.
You mean it, regardless of what he does in terms of policy stuff? Because like it looks like after the Australian election, that which was very like softly, don't spook the horses, don't break the vase.
Yeah.
It looked like the New Zealand Labour Party was listening to that.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, what does that mean, I guess, for the Canadian Liberals?
Yeah.
Like, what has even been their strategy? I don't think you can so easily distill it. That's partly the problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, their strategy's been to take charge of the moment, right? It is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to flip the script. And that's why I say, like, it's important what the Liberals do in their first month of office.
Right.
If they say, okay, so that's happening over the border in the US, we actually want to attract like US talent. And there's already been some talk about this around academia, around some tech stuff. Just start flooding money into, like, from the government directly into infrastructure and development. You know, this is what I would do, and I'm probably right. And make yourself a haven for talent escaping the US. And then leverage that into re-onshoring Canadian industry. Because this is essentially what they're going to need. They've got some of the same problems as the US around manufacturing.
Yeah.
They need some kind of revolution, and international capital is not going to do that for anybody. It needs to be state led. So if they do that, if they ascertain that correctly, and immediately move to just pour money into their economy from central government to build up capacity, and then using immigration from the south. And also the immigration of the people who would have gone to the US previously and now aren't. So we're talking like experts, technicians, like workers in general who are immigrating to Canada instead of the US now. Then you're looking at a situation where maybe other center-left governments say, oh shit, they're fucking killing it. We probably should be doing that too.
Well, there's quite a big, for example, like Caribbean immigrant community in Canada that tend to be like educated tech workers or academics.
Yeah.
And there's a reason they choose Canada over the US, some of those communities, right? So if they were to double down on that kind of strategy, then yeah, maybe there's like an internationalist way they could move forward there. But I don't know. We just haven't seen enough from Mark Carney to be clear what his kind of international priorities are, I think.
Yeah, and as you've said previously, like coming out of the banking sector is a good sign usually.
You just don't know. Like there's no way to know what that's going to translate into.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the funnier things out of the election, the Canadian election this time around, is this protest against the electoral system in Carleton and Ottawa, where they put 91 candidates on the list.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it's like the electoral ballot was like over a meter long.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great protests.
Yeah, fantastic.
Annoying people. I love that skill. That's fantastic. And it's true. Your elections are Paleolithic era nonsense, and you should sort that shit out, Canada. You should be embarrassed. You're bad, and you should feel bad.
Should we just pop up this Quebec seat that's been confirmed, and then maybe go into the final break of the afternoon? So there you have it.
There we go.
That is all they've got.
That's all you get. That's all you get, NDP.
Um,
Oof. Yeah, that's a worry.
they are leading in 10. They are leading in 10.
Yeah.
But
It's pretty severe.
yeah, long night for the NDP headquarters, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
there it goes. Oh, putting them on the side of the government. I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's go on a break. Dash away. Chuck any questions you have in the chat as per our other breaks. And we'll see you again in a few minutes.
We'll see you soon.
All right, we're back. We're back again.
We're back.
The page that I was using for map interactives, so I could look at stuff as it came in, has been down since just before we went on break, which is very frustrating. But things continue. We are not really. I think we're basically seeing out the evening at this point. We're unlikely to see any major changes. We could have stuff tipped to a larger liberal minority. And yeah, just no big surprises looking to be on the way.
Well, the biggest, I mean, based on what looks plausible right now, I guess for the Liberals, the best option would mean more options in terms of coalition deals or confidence in supply. And the worst options would mean minority government with really like bill by bill support, right? Like not consistent kind of reliable support in their governing. But yeah, I mean, the Liberals have got this in terms of who's going to win. It just could be quite an uncomfortable victory if the Conservatives keep coming back a little more. And yeah, it could kind of tie up some of their planned changes that they might want to make.
Yeah,
particularly if it just comes down to, a couple of votes, which that could be quite uncomfortable for them.
Yeah,
and we've seen that kind of thing overseas, really hamper governments in the past. So it could be tough, especially for Mark Carney, as we've been talking about this whole time. He's not a weathered politician.
Yeah,
He might not have the kind of capacity to walk into a room and eyeball down seasoned.
That's what all his banking experience is for. That's what all the banking experience is for.
What negotiating between 2.4 and 2.5% brings the same kind of experience. No, I mean, we see this all the time, right? It's remember the Don Brash experience of electoral politics in New Zealand. These skills are not compatible necessarily. Like,
yeah,
if you're lucky, they are, but there's no reason that necessarily being a high profile and successful banker makes you a high profile.
The Don Brash comparison to Mark Carney is pretty brutal.
Well, that's what he gets for being a banker. I should have thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, again, though, this does open up opportunities for the left, right? If the ruling party is relying on you to get, budget stuff over the line, you're saying, oh, looks like we've got a little bit of power here.
Yeah.
Better do what we say. Better add something in here, or you're not going to be able to run this country.
I mean, you say that, but that's on paper. That's what the NDP's been doing for the last term, right? And how's that worked out for them? They dissolved it before the Liberals did. So
yeah, but this is why I want to see Jagmeet Singh gone.
Yeah, he's been pretty embarrassing.
Yeah. It's not looking good for them. More electoral parties with a functional theory of power that aren't on the far right.
Can we, Dylan? Can we get back up the confirmed seats on the screen? Awesome.
Wonderful.
Wow, look at that. Yeah. Interesting, eh?
Bloc Québécois doing not too bad.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
I wonder if BQ have had a similar bounce to what the Liberals did, in that as they go Canada strong, the people in Quebec are like, wait a second.
If we're going to do nationalism, let's make it right. Yeah. I mean, I kind of would have thought so, but there were a few articles before today saying that they thought that it would actually hurt Bloc Québécois.
Looks like people got it wrong again.
Onto the Liberals, right? Because if you're going to support someone to defend against Trump, then that would kind of centralize into a kind of authority figure. But no, you're right. It looks like they did both. They ticked both boxes.
They could.
They were like two fingers up, one to Donald Trump and one to the Liberals. And good for them. Good for them.
Yeah. We've got a question in the chat, kind of a broader question about electoral politics from Kamatara. What things do you think we'll need in place to bring actual socialist and communist parties back to relative prominence, both here and other Western countries like Canada, etc.? Lol.
Yeah, just an easy one.
A collapse of Western fascist capital. No, I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, so many things.
So that you can actually have proper foreign interference, like we're pretending there is right now from places like China, right? Oh, that's really exciting. Dylan just messaged to say that the Canadian elections data folks are like blocking people more aggressively now. So we might not be able to pull live data for our graphics, which is pretty funny. Actually, like some of the pages, like the CBC, I think it might not just be us, because the CBC data page is down as well. Like you can't see live results on the CBC anymore, so they might just be having issues. Maybe they are having foreign interference.
It is wild that both of the Elections Canada website and the CBC website went down. I
mean, they maybe are being DDoSed, right? Like, there is because some people love to fuck around.
Okay.
And then that can be used any given way. Like, the Liberals rigged the vote. It was hacked, etc. Or if you're Liberals, this is the fucking Russians.
Always the Russians.
Or China or whoever. But yeah, this is the thing, right? Like, I think we're at a point where we're not seeing so much, if we're talking national politics within a global framework, right? we're not thinking so much about communism or socialism or other things that we might be able to promote through our Western electoral system. We need to be thinking more about, okay, here's the global South and the global North. How does global South politics start to encroach on the global North? In what ways does that appear? And I think, some of these might be communistic or be similar to socialist policies, but it's about a restructuring of economies as much as anything that forces you in directions of political systems, structures, or organizing. And unless we see a hard break in RBIO and in Western hegemonic dominance out of the US, that's just not likely to happen. China is our largest trading partner here in New Zealand. But if you look at what media and politicians and how they position themselves around or against China, very, very strongly and often with outright lies and using US far-right funded sources to do so, it takes a little bit more than just introducing like a pro-China party, right? And I think the roots of opposition to communism are much stronger than that. Even we're not. A lot of people don't even think of China as communist at this point. So there's not even a question of like who's our largest trading partner and thus whose structures should we mirror so that we're able to fund our economy. So that's my not particularly optimistic answer to that. I think you probably vanguard it, but I don't have any faith in current organizing of workers on the ground. It would have to come out of unions, and I think a number of our unions here are pretty anti-communist. We'd look for a shift back towards social democracy or like more social democrat models in the first instance. And even those get like screamed down as being communistic. I think you mentioned further up the chat, Kamatara, about the way that David Seymour pitches National as being socialist, right? And that's something that Matthew Hooton has been saying for like 2 decades, is that the National Party is communist. It's actually ludicrous, the depth to which these ideologies go among our discourse creators. And for much worse, that does have a pretty direct impact on the way political discourse develops, given how small a political economy and information environment we have here.
Oof, deep cut. Good job, Carl. I'm not gonna. That was interesting. I'm just looking at the voting.
No, I'm okay. I've just seen Coswell say some sad news. Javnit saying NDP leader is third in his rating. I don't care. He's failed as the leader of the NDP, and this is indicative of that. I think. Look, if he can't take that out,
third is brutal. Brutal.
That's brutal. And he has to go now. And in my opinion, that's good.
He's gone. But remember, he was like the new man on the block only 5 years ago? He was a big deal.
Yeah, but he went into the 2021 election. I think he was running as a leader during 2021. So
yeah, but no, I mean before that, there was suddenly like, oh, who was this new cool new guy? Yeah, Dylan, can we check out this quote you've got lined up? Yeah, I mean a lot of crowing coming from upper echelon libs, right?
Yeah. Interesting. What I'm keeping an eye out for is something similar to what Robinson Ardern did post the majority win, which was, we actually have to look after that 5% who decided to vote with us. Yeah. We're going to be party for all New Zealanders.
Yeah.
Which means we are gonna fuck over workers.
By all we mean the 5% of national voters who swung to vote for us in the New Zealand context, right? That's what Jacinda and Robertson meant when they did that.
But that's interesting from that quote we just saw up on the screen.
Yeah.
What we need is strong government. That is not something that I have heard out of a Western centre-left party in a hot minute.
Well, it sounds like national, right? That's almost literally what John Key and Chris Bishop said before our last election when they were trying to scare people off voting for New Zealand First. Like, they were saying we need a strong government to make decisions, important decisions for the future of our country, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, you must vote for national. And, like, that's the language that the Liberals are using in Canada, which I do think is really, like, quite interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it's contextually different, right? Like, when a sensibly centre-left government says that, I think the impacts of that are quite different. I mean, National was just lying, right? Like,
but it also goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning of the stream about the National Party of Government, you know, the natural party of government kind of assumption that works differently in different and functions differently in different power dynamics and with different political histories. So, like, the Liberal Party in Canada is in some ways similar to the National Party in New Zealand. Maybe not so much right now, but in the past, in terms of who you would assume would take over under conditions of national crisis, right? There's this unfortunate kind of psychological backwater aspect to our colonial aspirations that mean that we have this subservient kind of mindset, right, that these countries go for.
Yeah, and we hate that. We do hate that. I want to have a look at this. Consuelo said in the chat that Pierre Poilievre is actually second at the moment in his writing. That's so fucking funny.
That's very satisfying, yeah.
So that's fantastic. And this is the kind of stuff I was talking about earlier in the live stream around what do Conservatives do from here and how quickly do they tear themselves apart.
Yeah.
Because
it'll be interesting, eh?
When this happens to a minor party, when a minor party's leader gets like ousted, there's a real chance for like reestablishment and some harder line stuff to reinvigorate the membership, right? But when a natural party of government's leader loses in their writing, I should say, not electorate, and they lose the election, that's what's the language that we're seeing in New Zealand politics? That's a lolly scramble.
What does it say about the next 5 years for that party? Like, it means you need to turn hard from whatever they were doing, and unfortunately for them, probably what they were doing was the most effective thing they could possibly have done. So, like, I don't know what else. Like I was saying before, I think they're out of options. Like, the Conservative Party of Canada is screwed right now.
I'm trying to keep my hands away from relay. I've folded my hands. However, this does say to me that the way for the Conservatives to go forward is what we saw in the UK, and for the way that they succeed is by the Liberals really fucking it now.
Yeah.
And creating more inequality. If the Liberals decide now to be like, we're going to give workers heaps of cool shit, Conservatives should just die.
Well, look at what's happened in Mexico, right? The support for Sheinbaum is still over 80%, I think. She's got record-breaking political support across the spectrum. Like, people who used to be right-wing support her. Who knows? She's just doesn't make sense. She's just the most popular political figure in the world, and for some reason, nobody in any other countries pay attention to that political model. They all want to be Starmer.
Well, it's
sad.
It's capital capture, right? And that's basically what it comes down to.
It is, because the 20% of people who don't like her own all the companies.
It's it. They had such a
it's actual democracy.
Yeah.
People hate democracy.
Get rid of it. Elizabeth May seat confirmed for the Greens. It looks like it's probably going to be the only seat of the night.
Oh yeah, can we see that? Saanich Gulf Islands, 44%. Okay. Yeah, pretty clear.
Yeah. Coswell says the worry is instead of fixing things, NDP will pop in a white guy. Yeah, I mean there's a worry, right?
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, that's bad.
Honestly, yes. Like, I would not be surprised if that's what they did.
They're like, hey, actually, we need to try and be more like the Liberals.
Yeah.
Potentially, yes. I mean, they could just get Justin Trudeau, right?
What's he gonna do?
And put on some blackface.
Justin Lester doesn't have anything to do, right? Get him in.
From Wellington.
No one can tell the difference. There's two white Justins. It's like those old jokes of two people who look similar and have similar names running on the same ballot just so that one person can like siphon off 10% of the votes. So I mean, look, at what point does it become worth it as the NDP? Take a swing, honestly, respect.
Find a Mark Carmichael.
Carmichael? That's good.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I mean, though. There's an opportunity here for the NDP, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's an easier opportunity to take than you would have for a larger party. Do they fuck it up? I mean, I don't trust most electoral parties at this point.
No.
I think there's something rotten in Western liberal institutions, which is like just Western democratic institutions, I should say, en masse, that leads to them basically like trying to colonize or attempting to colonize, and actively promoting those structures with the people that are working within them. This is why the entire structure is so furious with Te Pāti Māori all the time.
Yeah.
Because they just refuse, right?
Which is great.
And it's sorry.
That's a theory of power, right? Again, go back to what you were saying before, like just refusing to capitulate to the regulatory kind of hall monitor style of parliamentary Westminster politics is a theory of challenging the state that I feel like most parties in Anglophone countries really struggle with. And usually, I mean, it's often Indigenous types who manage to push back against that because there's no reason they should respect the kind of vagaries of this kind of colonial institution that's come here and done nothing but harm. But yeah, there are other ways of challenging that. It's just that a lot of these ostensibly kind of centre-left parties really seem to struggle with it. I don't mean to sound like nihilistic. I think it's absolutely doable. It's just, it is always disappointing when you see a potential challenger just, fail and then fail and then fail and then lose like this, right? Yeah.
We're like the other big thing coming up, as Cosglaw has noted here, is the loss of party status for NDP, right? I think Bloc Quebecois are actually looking like they're going to keep this.
Yeah.
Like against early predictions.
Yeah.
They have definitely outperformed NDP here in terms of maintaining their vote share.
Absolutely.
I think it's 12 seats, and NDP are almost certainly not going to get 12 seats.
No, not a chance. On the Elections Canada website, and it's only registering 2/3 of the vote so far, 66%. Bloc Quebecois has 810,000 votes, and NDP has 580,000. So that's 7.7% versus 5.5%. But it's also interesting to see how similar the Conservative and Liberal votes are. Conservatives at 43.4% and Liberals at 47.2%. So that's 4% apart.
Yeah.
Again, don't first past the post, folks. Not even once. Why would you do that?
Yeah, it's not great, eh? As an electoral system, I should say. But then, like, Western democracy isn't great as an electoral system. I'm just putting my cards on the table there, and it's so thoroughly captured by powerful interests at this point. it is going to be interesting to see, right? Like the Liberals were able to get through on messaging here, and the existential threat stuff is also an existential threat to Canadian capital, right? Once they're a government, how does capital start leveraging on the Liberals?
Well, exactly. Yeah. This is why this entire time my note of caution has been like, we don't know what Mark Carney's politics are. Still, like, he's run an entire campaign, he's been prime minister, and like, I don't know what he'll do in a different type of crisis. Like, I think that is a concern. Like, that's one thing you should want to know about somebody before you vote for them.
Yeah. What's interesting here as well, just to dive into some of the writing results a little bit, is that a number of the NDP seats have been lost to Conservatives.
Interesting.
Which is speaking, I think, to that worker targeting, right?
Yeah.
Some of it as well is going to be the Liberal shift, so as a vote split.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at Windsor West and Ontario, which have been picked up by the Conservatives with 41.3%. Brian Massey is third on 26%, and then the Liberal candidate, thank you, Dylan, for putting this up, is on 29. So unlike the Wellington mayoral elections and the Wellington local elections, they don't have STV.
Interesting.
So yeah, we are actually seeing some vote splitting there, causing Conservatives to come through the middle. So yeah, interesting. Kind of set of conditions, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, these are the kind of results that, from an outsider perspective, that places see, and then they turn away from systems like MMP because they go, "Oh, we're actually more scared," right? Like, the votes got split. We need to centralize more. It needs to be more about just having two parties, and it was the minor parties problem. This is Ralph Nader actually personally door knocked all of these places, right? And like somehow ruined all this bullshit that you hear.
For 30 years.
As someone on the left, yeah, right? So it is just kind of childish, this like reticence to improve your voting systems, where actually the solution would be to get rid of first past the post and have, at the very, very least, an STV system where people could, Australia-like, pass on their votes from their first preference down to their second preference down to their third preference, and therefore not waste your first. Maybe you want to vote for the Rhinoceros Party, right?
I mean, there's 91 seats in the other electorate, right? Or 91 candidates. So.
Candidates, absolutely. And they have, you have a party called the Rhinoceros Party. That's your satire party. And I think that's delightful because it doesn't mean Republican in name only. It means an actual rhinoceros. And I think that's so cute. Good for you. Good for you, Canada.
I mean, this is also a failure of the NDP to understand the moment, right?
Yeah.
If their votes are getting eaten both by the Conservatives and the Liberals because they weren't able to tap into that nationalism in a way that still met the needs of their membership, then, I mean, maybe you can say it was inevitable, right? Like maybe there was no way for a party that distances itself from nationalist tendencies to properly hook into this. But I mean, in the end, that's still a failure, right? Left-wing parties can just lie as well. And they tend not to at disservice to themselves and to their membership. Also just offer more bribes.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're not bribes if you're going to do them. That's government is essentially a system of redistribution of power, much as economics and politics are, right? And there are ways that you can just say, hey, this is who I stand for. If you're this type of person, and if you want this thing,
big dollars,
me, and I'll make this thing happen, then you do the thing. And that's not, there's nothing.
That's politics, right? We use the term bribes with a sense of irony.
In a complimentary sense. I mean, that's what we were talking about Brazil before, but that's what Lula did. He was like, hey, if you're poor or middle class vote for me and got massive majorities and kept returning more and more money to working class and middle class people. And rich people kept saying that was like bribery and dishonest and corrupt. And it's like, well, I don't know what you expect. Like,
Yeah, but
don't vote for me then.
look,
you're not a problem.
funneling money to the very rich.
Yeah.
If you put it anywhere else, that's
Yeah.
corruption. And this is it, right? Like it's just language games. But I mean, you can do this as NDP, and also when you getting into the situation where there's a possibility of a liberal minority, you do the New Zealand First thing. You do the Winston Peters. I'm the kingmaker. I'm gonna make the good things happen. Look at the good things we did. So this has been a consistent failure of the NDP for years and years. Unable to effectively communicate that they are the reason that the Liberals have had to do progressive policy.
Yeah.
And you can talk about resource or like blah, 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 whatever you want, or like not being able to get buy-in in the media. Okay.
Yeah.
Change it. Okay. How are you going to fix that? Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like you either find a way to get around that blockage or you build an alternate system. So you're getting directly to voters. Like,
yeah.
But then they don't. And part of that is like the bubbling of political institutions, and part of it is because these people don't really want to do it.
No, well, that's the problem, right? It's actually easier for them to not do it.
Yeah. How are you feeling, Philip? Because I feel like there's not much more to get into here. How about you, chat? How are you feeling? Is there much more that you're just holding on excitedly for that we should stick around and continue with the live stream?
I don't think we're going to hit a majority. That's the main thing, right? I don't see a majority happening.
No. Oh, yeah. Can you do that? Yeah, mark a lib minority.
Yeah, I just don't see.
And then we can be embarrassed when someone takes a screen cap of that and it's a majority later, and we'll be like, oh, hey, sometimes you get the calls wrong.
But also, I also don't think the NDP is going to do well enough to get to 50%. So it is going to be tough, I think, for the Libs.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. But if I'm the Liberals, if I'm Mark Carney, I'm on the phone to BQ right now, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And being like, yeah, you can secede.
I mean, this is turns out it was the opportunity of a lifetime, right? Like, yeah, it will be actually fascinating to see what their demands are.
Yeah, Coswell says, watching Quebec, I don't know if those are done counting if Bloc loses majority in province.
No.
Yeah. Who can tell? I think most of them are pretty. They're not done counting, but it's like pretty clear that they're taking them out. And they might lose popular vote because Liberals have come up as second candidate in a lot of these places. But I don't think they're going to lose enough seats to drop outside of party status. Any final questions from the chat? And any final thoughts from you, Philip?
It's also funny to look at a map of Canada. You know how after every American election there are these, let's gently say, ill-informed Republican supporters who look at a map based on area and go, "What the hell? How is all this red? How's all this red being voted for the Republicans, and yet
there's no one there, mate?
What the hell?" It's funny that in Canada it's almost the opposite. Like all of the smaller areas are the conservative areas, and then the larger areas are often Liberal or NDP. So it's just cute to see that, these trends don't hold.
Canada really are different than the United States, and I never really understood that until now.
They're at a crossroads, if you will. Yeah.
We got someone asking about Vancouver Island. Is there something we can pop up quickly, Dylan? it looks like we've got nothing else too much from the chat in terms of questions. Right.
Oh, yeah.
The island has writings itself, and we have it zooming on specific
Do a couple.
writings. Yeah, maybe just bring up a couple of those at random.
Oh, wow. It's very funny that the other Green Party co-leader came fifth in his writing. Oh, Green Party of Canada. Never change. Ooh, looking good.
A single green seat.
I know.
Yeah.
Wild, eh?
All right. What are your first day predictions, Philip? Let's tie this up. Let's get this done.
Okay. Well, I think it's obvious that the Liberals are going to get a minority government. They're going to win, but they're going to get a minority. And they're going to be incredibly excited about their success and then realize it's going to be very difficult to actually pass any laws without making some uncomfortable decisions and some alliances they don't entirely understand. That's my prediction. How about you?
I reckon Carney wins, announces
Yep.
communism,
Bold.
says
Change of pace.
the second world is back, baby.
The second world. Amazing.
And
Retro.
goes all in against the US. Like, you want a red scare? Here it comes.
I guess we'll see.
Why do you think there's red on the fucking maple?
That's true. Yeah. Also, their party color is red. So in a way.
We'll just cycle through some of these Vancouver writings now. So Liberal leads, and some of them.
Yes.
I think there's one still being led by the NDP there. But yeah, just like real collapse of the NDP vote. And as we've said, like, this is about a consolidation behind the natural parties of government, because I think it's both Conservative and Liberal, but particularly for Liberals, right? Canadian unionism. That's actually a really hard word to pronounce, Kamatara. There's some shout outs for you, Dylan, for the graphics.
So good.
Yeah, absolutely smashing it. Big shout out to Dylan for pulling all of these together for us and for producing for us this afternoon. We'll see what happens. Well, did we operate the lathe today? Let's find out in the next week and a half. But the next thing coming up is Australian election livestream on Saturday, 3rd of May. We will hopefully have more co-hosts because it's not the middle of the day. And we'll be back with some cool graphics. And it's a little bit closer to home. So there are some real visceral impacts for us, depending on what goes down in Australia. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone who's been in the chat and having a little discussion with us and listening in. Philip, any last words from you?
No, we appreciate it. Thanks so much, everyone who's dropped by. I think it's been a cool experiment to see how this works, and it's worked really well. And it's amazing. Thank you so much, Dylan. He's a champion. Everyone watching here, find Dylan's work and support and follow. Just absolute monster. Love it.
Yeah, I'll do one final shout out for Dylan. Last time we did an election, he made a tracker for us on the fly and handed it over. So yeah, really fantastic working with him. And as you've seen, has delivered again. All right, that's 1 of 200 Canadian Livestream signing off. Keep in touch, everyone. Follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky. And subscribe. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because hopefully we'll have a bit more content coming up here. But you can also catch our podcast here with badly done closed captions. All right. Peace out, everybody.
Awaits you in the off-world colonies. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity